Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Run Cape Town podcast. You are joined here with Jamie Hutting, myself as host, and I'm joined by Coach Ntutu Letseka. Today, we are on episode 5. We are officially 10 weeks out from race date. And today, we'll be touching on balancing your mileage or your training with some recovery. And then towards the end, we'll be touching on the importance of strength training. Our athletes here at Coach Parry will know that we are huge on strength training to get you running longer and faster and just feeling stronger, especially over the marathon distance. And of course, with a little bit of injury prevention, or maybe a lot of that actually. So today in Tutu, before we get into the nitty gritty topic, over this weekend was Women's Day, and across the country there were various runs or races. Particularly in Cape Town, I think it's quite a popular one, 5 and 10K distance, with 10K being most popular. To get us started into today's topic, let's just chat a little bit about what our athletes that may have run a race over this weekend, what does their recovery look like after the race while they are still training for a marathon?
So, of course, as we spoke about in the previous episodes, is that racing is part of the culture of running. So people will be running races, and we can't have people training for 12 weeks and not attending races. And people will do them in different ways. Some people might use them as easy runs, social runs, running with friends. You could use them to replace training sessions. So often people will use a 5K, for example, to replace an interval session because it's almost the same intensity. And then you sometimes use them as actual races, as going out and testing yourself and seeing how far you've come. This is still quite early in the plan, but I mean, also you said that like the Total Sports Women's Race is a very popular race, and many people have entered. And I think it's a flat and fast course, so like why not go out for a good time? So when you do include races in your training, it's important for you to think about how it affects your training. And part of the benefit that we give is that we can advise you how to do that. So if you've used it as a training run, that's fine, nothing changes. A 10K easy run for you on a marathon program should be bread and butter, depending on what your level of running might be. It might be anywhere from 50 minutes, 60 minutes, maybe 70 minutes. It just replaces whatever run you had in the day on that day if you had a run scheduled. So don't worry too much about that. If you've used it to replace an interval session, first I hope you've got to think about running long. You probably have to shorten your long run a little bit because you don't want to be doing too many back-to-back hard runs. And then just think a little bit about how it affects recovery in the coming days. So it's the same way as if you've done an interval session. You still need 24 to 48 hours of recovery post. Make sure you follow your normal recovery strategies, taking in fuel after your run. I know we often like to go and, sometimes go have a beer or go, you can do all of that, but just take care that you are doing the basics, taking in enough carbohydrate and with enough protein for muscle repair and that sort of thing. If you've done a race now, a race is a different story. If you've gone all out and gone for a time, a race is very, very hard on the body. So now we have to start factoring in how much damage have you done. And again, it depends on your level. Like when I run a 10K race, I take 3 easy days afterwards because I know it's hard on my body. And also I'm in my 40s now, early 40s, but I'm getting on a bit and the body doesn't quite recover as it did when I was younger. So that gets taken into account. But for most people, if you run hard, you just cannot carry on with your training plan as is. So if you've got an interval session scheduled on the Tuesday and you've run a hard 10K on Saturday or Sunday, don't go out and try and hammer your session on Tuesday. This is where you've got to listen to your body, see how you're feeling. And I would almost say then that Tuesday becomes an easy run, an easy recovery day. And then only sort of on Thursday do you then start to pick up your plan as is. And that's sort of part of the cost of running races. I think we mentioned this, that it does affect your training plan. And when you choose what race distance you do, you think about those consequences. The 10K is fine. It's not going to disrupt your training too much. But factor in those 3 to 5 days after race day. Don't go out and hammer sessions. Monitor your body. Feel like sort of subjectively how you're feeling. Are you sore? Are you stiff? Are you mentally tired? If you are, drop the interval session. Do an easy run. So that's basically that.
No, very good point. I think it's great that I'm very much a novice when it comes to running distance. So a genuine question I have is if you are still experiencing your DOMs after your race, and I'm embarrassed to say for how long I've experienced DOMs for, and if I'm still experiencing, say now I ran on Saturday or Sunday, and I'm still sore on Wednesday and Thursday, is it still fine for me to go out on a run? And what sort of should my training look like when I'm returning to training?
So again, it becomes that almost degree of how sore are you? Does your DOMS, if you've experienced in DOMS or stiffness, and again, we've got to differentiate between like pain. There's a difference between like you've hurt something where you like, you've maybe pulled or strained a muscle, and it happens. Like when you run a hard race, intensity does come with that risk. Or is it just like muscle stiffness? You get stiff from a long run, but it doesn't mean that you don't run for a week because you're stiff. So there is a certain point when does the stiffness impair movement? Does it impair your normal daily? If you're so sore that you are struggling to like walk up a flight of stairs or you can't do basic tasks, that means you're potentially on the injury spectrum. So then I would look at cross training, doing non-impact stuff, going on the bike, taking a swim, maybe a light walk. But if it's just DOMs where sometimes you start running and it's a little bit stiff, but then it settles and it doesn't get any worse, you can just go out and do an easy run. I think the key thing is not to then try and do the harder sessions or the longer sessions. So the worse that stiffness is, you're reverting more towards away from longer, harder sessions towards easier sort of efforts where you're running like at the slow end of your easy run pace, like, low heart rate runs if you use heart rate. And in many ways that serves as active recovery. I know it's a hot topic and people might not say, running is not recovery, but if you do run slow enough, like it's adaptive. It actually allows you to adapt a little bit more. Running on tired legs is part of the trick of particularly in marathon training, but you don't want to overdo it where you're actually hurting. So it is just about monitoring and feeling how it affects your daily things. If you go out for a run and when you start you're hobbling and you just cannot and you're like limping your run, please just stop, go home, rest. But if you can move okay and it's just a little bit of mild discomfort, then it's okay. As long as you keep things easy and don't try and do a 2-hour run. Go out and do a 30, 45-minute run, maybe an hour if you're a bit more experienced. So it's judgment and it's a little bit more experience, just listening to your body. And I can't give you an exact, like, here's what you do. But it's always about protecting yourself and making sure that you're able to think about like the next day. Can you then go out? If you do this run today, will you be able to train the next day? Will you be able to do your Thursday session? If you can't, then don't do it.
Oh, very good point. I think when you are feeling those initial, sore muscles and you think I can't even walk, you'd be surprised if you just start hobbling a little bit, even if you just walk around the room, to be honest. You don't even have to
Yeah.
go around the block. Just with a little bit of, pushing through that initial stiffness and really, really sore legs, then
Yeah.
you do start to loosen up. It's actually quite amazing. Then,
Yeah.
unfortunately, when you sit down again and you sit down for a while, it feels like you're starting from square one. But
Yeah.
oh, thanks for that, Ntutu. Now with today's topic, we are of course following on from that. So when we have, athletes that are maybe training for their first marathon, I know that we've covered this in all of our podcasts, as although we are not just focusing on novice runners, but a lot of people will be going into a marathon block maybe after coming out of a shorter or speed block, etc. So going into marathon training, a lot of people are going to be doing more running than they have been previously. So how can we maybe just touch on that balance of balancing the increase in training leading up to the race, but then also making sure we're getting in enough recovery?
Okay. So, I mean, we're now 10 weeks out. So if you're going forwards, we're in week 3 of the training plan, and we normally work in 4-week blocks. So in this particular block, you will now have probably reached the peak for this block, not your overall training cycle, but you've been building up. So like, your long run would have progressed from 2 hours, 2:15, 2:30. If you're doing like a Thursday session, it might be up to an hour, 10 hour and 15. It depends on the plan you're on. And so all your sessions are progressing. And as you're increasing the volume, you're increasing the total work that you're doing, you're introducing more fatigue and you're affecting recovery. And we mentioned briefly, and we'll talk about this in future episodes, that recovery is the key part of how you develop. Like you can't just keep building and building indefinitely and then get to race day and go out and run your marathon. You have to put in recovery. But part of training is that you need to introduce a stress. You can't, if you don't stress yourself, you're not going to induce adaptation to improve. And that's where this balance comes in of the two things we manipulate are basically pace and duration. And
Yes.
pace, I'm going to step back here. It's not pace per se, it's intensity. pace is a proxy for intensity, but pace is not an intensity. Pace is an output metrics. What I mean by that is that you go out for a run or anything, and you dictate how hard you work, right? You push your legs more, you pump your arms more, you breathe in more. You decide how hard you run. Okay, so that's one of the things that you're doing. And then it depends, obviously, what have you done before? Have you done a long run the day before? Have had a rest day? Did you sleep well? Did you go out and have drinks with your mates or whatever? All that stuff is inputting into what you're capable of doing that day. And the thing that everyone forgets about is the external conditions. Like, is it hot? Is it windy? Is it cold? Is it hilly? Are you running at altitude? All those things make a
Yeah.
difference. And when all those things come together, that outputs as your pace. So all we're doing is we're working backwards and saying, okay, we know what this pace is, and it is a proxy for the intensity, with the caveats that there's all the other stuff happening that we maybe not accounting for. So pace is a good sort of marker for intensity, but it is not the intensity you run. Like if it's hotter, at the same effort, you run slower. So then that's kind of shifting it a little bit, if that makes sense. So that's kind of what I want people to remember when we talk about pace, that we're using pace as a proxy for intensity. So with the thing that people do, and I know if I give you a pace, and I'm not saying you particularly, Jamie, but you as you're the person talking to me now. So if I say, Jamie, your pace range is 6:30 to 7 minutes a K, almost always you will go out and run at 6:30, not at 7.
Yeah.
It's human nature.
Yeah.
We think the faster we go, we're getting fitter, we're pushing ourselves a bit more. And then sometimes you might be like, you see it as a challenge for you to beat. And you say, actually, maybe if I run at 6:15, I'm going to be a little bit fitter. If I run at 6
Yeah.
minutes per K, I'm going to be fitter. So suddenly you've gone from 6:30 to 7 minutes a K, and you're now at 6 minutes per K. And all you're doing is just running harder.
Yeah.
And harder is not, you're running harder. You're still not, you might not be in the same intensity zone that we want you to be in. So it's now no longer an easy run. It's actually now more like a tempo run for you. So that's where the pace and intensity come in. You need to, we've spoken about running in the correct intensity zones, and I'll explain why this is important now. So as you increase that intensity, that pace, which is a proxy for intensity, you are working harder and essentially introducing more fatigue and more eccentric loading. You are using your body's resources more severely as you increase. So your glycogen, for example, muscle glycogen gets used more. And it's not a linear progression. So it's not like, every 30 seconds increase is the same as the one before. So 7:30 to 7 minutes per K, from 7 to 6:30, 6:30 to 5 to 6 to 5:30, that's not a linear progression. The harder you go, it actually becomes exponential. So if you look up the classic lactate curve, where it's flat for a little bit, and then as you get through the zones, that inflection points, they get steeper and steeper and steeper, and by the end, it's actually exponential. So the cost of intensity progresses in a non-linear fashion. So when you add those 30 seconds per K onto your run, you're not introducing the same fatigue that you would from a previous 30 seconds increase. It's probably going to be twofold. The next 30 seconds per K will be fourfold, and so on and so on, because it is that sort of exponential curve. So when it comes to your training, now, if you think about that now with your training, so as we are increasing the volume, every week you're going up and you're doing a little bit more work. If you're not running at the correct intensity, we've set up your plan so that it has a certain amount of training load per week. And when you change the intensity and you change the pace of your sessions, you are now making that session harder and more costly. So that 1 hour run, for example, now the training load is more than what you anticipate, and you're introducing more fatigue into your body. And then that's going to affect your ability to then handle the training load. And it's going to impact your ability to recover from those sessions. That then has a knock-on effect of does your next session suffer? Does the next week suffer? And then by the time you get to your long run, you're more tired than you're supposed to be. So now you go and you do a 2.5 hour long run, but then you go into week 3 and you've just done a lot more work than you expected. So, and that's how when we talk about pacing, it's not like we're not punishing people. We're not trying to, not let people have fun. It is because we're trying to make sure that you are able to introduce a sustainable load that introduces a stress that your body can handle. And if your body can handle that stress, it's able to then adapt and improve. If the stress is more than what your body can't handle, it's not going to adapt to it. And you end up essentially, because training makes you worse. This is the reality. The actual training session makes you worse. The recovery makes you better. The adaptation makes you better. But if that stress is more than you can handle, you never pick up and improve. And you're always sitting in a deficit. So you really, really need to be in control of your pacing. And we have spoken before about how to work out your easy run paces. There's calculators you can use and things like that. I want to go into the details of it. I want to turn this into a maths session. We're sitting here doing
Oh,
calculations.
please no.
So, but you really do just have to manage that pace. And remember that pace is affecting intensity. It's a proxy for intensity. And as intensity goes up, the cost is not linear to your body. It is exponential.
Yeah. I think it's important to remember that the human body is not a machine.
Yeah.
And we need to treat it like that. As you mentioned, there's so much that goes into your training, so much that affects it. So being aware of the environment, if you are maybe traveling at the moment and you're in a new place, or maybe I know a few places are experiencing heat waves at the moment, to just be aware of that, and to also, I think, be a little bit more forgiving with
Yeah.
yourself. You're doing this for enjoyment. So I think majority of Cape Town Marathon runners are doing it for enjoyment, I hope. So yeah, thank you for touching on that. So yeah, when you mention the training and sort of we've mentioned following a plan in the previous episodes. It's important to also remember that that is up for change. So, as you mentioned, if you are racing or maybe you did a session a little bit too hard, you can adjust the plan. But would you maybe just confirm the idea of missing a session? Do you catch that up? So, for example, if I didn't have time to even go out for a 45-minute run today, and maybe I just did an easy 5-10 minute walk around the block, should I then move my run? For example, also, if you are doing a race and you can't maybe do your interval session in 2 days' time because you're a little bit sore, should you catch that up in another time? Or how should you adjust your training after that?
It really is a delicate balancing act, because part of it is you have to do the work. And we speak about consistency as being one of the pillars of training, that it is important to be consistent. But again, consistency is balanced with recovery, and they work together. If you're consistent, you recover. If you recover, you can be more consistent. They will be working in unison throughout. So when you miss a session, I'm generally not a fan of making up sessions. It's different to adjusting the training plan. So if you've got a training plan and I know, on Wednesday, I've got a meeting and I'm going to be, have to leave home early and I'm not going to be able to train, I can make allowance and say, okay, maybe I have 45 minutes. So I can move like my Sunday recovery run to Thursday, and then I can sort of swap things around. So that's okay, as long as you're following some ground rules. And some of those are, for example, don't do back-to-back interval sessions. Your body is not equipped to handle doing. So if you're running, for example, a race and you couldn't do the interval session on Tuesday and you can only do it on a Friday, don't go and do your interval session on Friday and then go and run your race on Saturday. Your body can't handle that dose of intensity in close proximity to each other. So that's part of that. But in terms of then making up sessions, remember, we've got to think about your training plan as the entire body of work. It's the individual sessions make up, the general metaphor is this thing of like, you're laying a foundation, you're building a structure, and we treat each session as a brick. You're laying those bricks, and those bricks then stack up and they build a solid wall. And of course, we don't want a structure with holes in it, but it can tolerate some gaps, not like massive gaps. So if you now, let's say I've got an interval session, I move it to Friday, and then I've got my long run on Saturday. I'm now introducing a much greater stress load for that weekend than existed before.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to, and again, your body remembers the most recent work. We work with something called acute chronic workload ratio. And I know it's just one of the frameworks we can use. And we talk about acute load as being the work you've done recently, and chronic is long-term work. So your body remembers acute load. So if you now, and it remembers like the most recent session. So if you've done 2 sessions, those will affect you more than something you did 4 weeks ago, for example, something you did on Monday. It all still counts, but the closer you are to now, those things account more. So if you now start shifting sessions and moving sessions on, you either going to introduce like that load now. So you move interval to Friday, a long one on Saturday, and then you've got a recovery run on Sunday. Great. And then now you've got an interval session the following Tuesday. So now you've done intervals on Friday, long run on Saturday, and then strength on Monday, and then intervals on Tuesday. You've now introduced a lot of work in a very short space of time.
Yeah.
And then that knock-on effect is then going to compound as you move into the weeks. So, and really the golden rule is, as long as it's not something that happens with regularity, if you're going to miss one session in a week, just write it off. It's okay. It really is. Like, we're not, like you said, we're not machines. Like,
Yeah.
physiological adaptation is very, very complicated, and your body responds more to the total volume of work done over the training plan rather than an individual session. So you don't want to be the person who's obsessed about like that one run. I've missed a run, so I'm gonna like obsess and move it over. So if it's just one session and you're not missing these sessions regularly, it's fine. And I would
Yes.
just then say, write it off and protect the integrity of your overall plan. Because then you just be sitting there and shuffling your bricks and dominoes around for the next 2 weeks, trying to figure out, and you just keep knocking sessions on, and the next thing you know, you're into your recovery week and you're doing a long run in a recovery week when you shouldn't be.
Yeah. No, completely. And I think instead of, stressing about it and just really focusing on, oh, I missed one run, maybe take the time to enjoy, the extra few minutes in the day and go to bed earlier and get some extra recovery in there so
Yeah,
that you are feeling fresh for the sessions to come after that.
yeah.
But Tutu, could you also just quickly touch on, if people go into a bit of panic mode and they know they should be building over the weeks to race date, of course, with some recovery weeks in there. What would you say about adding on, making our runs longer from week to week? I know that beginner runners might hear about, a 10% rule, adding 10% to your long run each week. Is that something that you would recommend across all of your runs, or maybe just particulars leading up to the race?
Okay, so I mean, we obviously touched on pace and intensity, and duration is another way of manipulating how much work we're doing. And
Mm.
again, so you see your long run goes up. It might be 10 minutes, 15 minutes a week, and so that's fine, and that's what you do. And and I know something we get a lot is people think, am I doing enough? Because you're going to run 42 Ks, and we don't do the marathon distance in training. So people think, have I done enough in my long run? And you often hear that you need to run. I know, like with comrades, there's usually those guidelines, like to get a bronze, you need to run 1,000 Ks from January to March, whatever, to April or something like that. And people think, oh, have I done enough running? So what people start doing is then just adding 10 minutes here. And so, and we mentioned this before, and how the intensity will affect it, but the duration also affects it. So if you just start adding volume to your runs without thinking about the integrity of the week, you're going to, again, just introduce a lot more work than what is anticipated and what you can probably handle. And you've got to be very, very careful about chasing numbers. So it's all it, and we try and create balanced training plans, and the training plans are designed to get you safely from point A to point B, to ensure that you accumulate the amount of work you need to do with the recovery weeks in place to make sure that when you get to race day, you are able to complete the race. And the idea is that we don't want you overtrained, because if you get to the race and you are overtrained, you're going to be either too tired to have a good performance, or you will break down during the race or before the race, and then you don't actually get
Oh.
to race day itself. So you'll be very, very careful about the duration. And people think, oh, then I'm just adding 10 minutes onto, it's 2 hours. What's 10 minutes? But
Mm.
if you've been building, and they say it was 2.5 hours last week, and now we give you 2 hours 45, and you say, well, I'll just add 10 minutes on. You've now gone from 2 hours 30 to 2 hours 55.
Yeah.
And that's now a 25-minute increase. And if you do it by as a percentage, that's quite a fair amount. So that's always something to be very, very careful about. Then in terms of the actual rules themselves, look, I don't like rules. They're not rules, they're guidelines. So we have different ones. So the 10% one is the one that most people know, that you advise to increase your volume by 10%. I'll always add the caveat that 10% is very different. If you're like running 120 Ks a week, I would
Mm-hmm.
not advise you add 10% to your volume. We don't really work in volume numbers, but as an example, if you're running 120 Ks per week and you add 12 Ks onto your training plan, it's very different to if I'm running 20 Ks a week and I add 10%, which is 2 Ks into the week.
Yes.
So there is a difference. And when you are in peak loading, I would not use a 10% rule to manage your load. I will look at the session. You need to think about, what is the session I need to do? I need to do my 2.5 hour long run. that's the session in place. But there
Yeah.
are good guidelines for beginners and early on in training for you to build stuff. There are other different rules. Like I know, I can't remember whose rule this is exactly, that it's 1 mile per day of running. So if you run 4 days a week, you can add 4 miles onto your training load. But
Ah.
those rules aren't very useful because they don't tell you how to distribute the volume, right? So, so
Okay.
if you have 10 Ks to play with, do you put all 10 Ks in one run? Do you take 2 Ks and put it into each run? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there is a nuance to how you add the runs, because sometimes you have the long run as your focus of the week and you increase your long run quite a bit. Sometimes the
Mm,
sessions you do and your interval sessions are volume too. They're contributing to your training load. And
yeah.
then often what happens is with our training plans is that the easy runs actually stabilize at a point. You get to the point where you run 70 minutes and that's your easy run. So your volume increase might be in one session. So just be very careful of just saying, I'm going to keep increasing by 10%. And sometimes you actually want to increase volume and hold it and allow yourself to adapt. Because if you just keep going up without making sure you adapted to the previous training volume, you're just introducing again more fatigue, more stress, and then potentially illness and injury. So good guidelines, don't stick to them religiously. The idea is just to, again, that balance that you can't, we are at most risk from injury and illness when we make dramatic changes in our training.
Yeah.
If you make dramatic changes in intensity and dramatic changes in volume, that's when you're at risk, because your body struggles a lot with acute loading. If you try and, if you've never lifted 100 kilos bench press and you go and you try and bench press 100, you're going to put yourself at great risk. But if you build up over weeks and do the protocol and you get to the point where you can bench press 100, that's fine. As
Yeah.
an example. So acute load is that's where you're at most risk. If you go up and you just double you go from 2 hours to 3 hours, that is a massive change. So the rules are just there to show you that you need to be cognizant of how much you're adding to your overall training load, and then think about not just this week, but the overall timeline of your training.
You speak of bench pressing 100 kgs. Now,
I
gosh,
don't know
that
if
is.
that's heavy or light. To me, it sounds
Oh,
heavy.
yes. For sure. I mean, I'd love to be able to say I could lift that weight, but I actually might come out with a broken collarbone or something like that, more of the sort. But speaking of strength training, it is something that we said we'd mention towards the end of this
Yeah.
episode. So, strength training, look, it might not be in every runner's routine at the moment, and some might be introducing it now. They might not be introducing it, for the first time, but they might be increasing their strength training sessions from 1 to 2 or 3, for
Mm.
example. So with strength training, maybe we can also just touch on how that is also adding to your training load, and it can also be seen as a way of progressing as you go through these or cycles throughout the 12 weeks. Maybe we could just touch on that quickly.
Yeah, so strength training is an interesting one, because most runners, we've been talking about doing, super duper long runs. And I know I used to be this person. I'm happy to go out and, and run 2 hours. Yesterday I went for my long run and I ran 25 Ks, and I'm more than happy to do that. But try and
Yes.
talk me into doing a 20-minute strength session and you will have like endless complaining, and I will whine about it for the whole day afterwards, because I'm that person. But
Yeah.
really, it is important work, and yes, it contributes to your training load, and it's a very difficult thing to quantify in terms of, because it's not like, we know how to quantify cardio stress. You take time spent, the duration, and you use RPE, or the wearables use heart rate metrics and power metrics to quantify that load. But strength training is hard, but you can subjectively say, but that's not the point of strength training. I think I don't want to dwell on that part of it, because strength training done properly and done well actually enhances your running experience.
Yeah.
It's a complementary training idea that if you do it well and execute it properly, it will actually make your running better and easier.
Mm.
And really, and what I want to where I want to start with this is to say that, running is hard work physically. And I think it's often that we neglect, is that I always say that running is a contact sport. But the
Yeah.
contact is you and the ground, not you and, like, with rugby, like tackling someone. It's you in the ground, and you're hitting the ground hard for a long, long time. And all of our listeners here are training for the marathon. So a marathon is 42 kilometers long, which is very, very long. 42.2, so I must not forget that extra 200
Oh
meters. That
no.
is very, very important. And if you think about, we all count our steps daily. How many steps do you think a person does in a marathon?
Gosh, that's a good question. I'd like to say we're looking upper 30,000s,
Yeah,
maybe
no,
in the 40s
yeah.
for maybe
So
how long your legs are.
So, so it's more your stride length. So precisely that. So if your stride length, so for most people, stride length will be between 1 meter and 1.3. So actually, I was looking at my data when I ran the Milton Keynes Marathon. My stride length is 1.4 meters, or that was my average for the marathon distance. And if you reverse engineer the step count, I did 31,000 steps in my marathon.
Mm,
So that is a lot of steps. And you're right, it'll be somewhere between 30,000 and 42,000. If your stride length is 1 meter, you'll do 42,000
yeah.
steps in your marathon. That is a lot of steps.
Yeah.
Repeatedly in a forward motion for 2.5, 3, 4 hour, 5 hours. And you're putting in a lot of force, and it's single leg force. You're putting single leg on one leg and then moving to one leg and the other. And each step you're putting through about 2.5 times to 3 times your body weight through
Sure.
the force of impact. So it's a lot. And running does give you some protection to that. Obviously, by training, you're adapting your body to it. But the reality is most of us just aren't strong enough. Um,
Yeah.
you know, I think, I know I used to work in a lab when I was younger. And when I worked in the lab, I used to lift things, carry things. I was walking up and down flights of stairs, and I would walk to the other side of campus and go, and lift spectrophotometers and equipment into the lab and then carry it all back. So I was quite active and strong. But the last 10 years I've worked in an office, and I'd spent most of my days sitting in an office
Yeah.
chair. I'm just not, other than when I'm running, I'm not doing anything. So I'm not physically strong. And I think it's an honesty thing. I know, I've lacked physical strength to carry out the things I want to do. And with that in mind, we need to find ways to protect ourselves and develop ourselves to be able to handle the stresses of running. And strength training is very, very crucial to that. And I think it's something that we cannot neglect as runners. And the thing is, you don't need to do as much as you think you do. That's the first thing.
Yeah.
I think that's we don't need to go to the gym. You don't need to have expensive equipment. You don't need to be lifting insane weights, but it's doing the right
No.
kind of work. And I'll sort of get onto what that is now. But the benefits of strength training are that strength training makes your muscles stronger. So
Mm-hmm.
you're working those muscles, and we do work that is complementary to running, not just you're not going to go out there and do 100 pull-ups. It's work that is specific to running. That's the one thing. It strengthens the connective tissues around your ligaments and your tendons. Those are the things that are taking an impact when you're running. And the other benefit is that stronger muscles are more fatigue resistant, obviously, because
Mm-hmm.
and they're also able to produce more power. They're able to produce more force. And that's the other benefit, is that strength training actually benefits your performance. It makes you perform better, because if your muscles are stronger and you're able to contract those muscles more forcefully, you can have a more powerful stride. So then the dual benefits there, that strength training strengthens your muscles and connective tissues and protects against injury, but also by making your muscles stronger and being able to produce more force, you actually improve your performance. And I think people are often surprised. They do a month of strength training and suddenly they just find, oh, my easy runs are easier. And it's more than what you'd expect. I mean, the running is still helping, but I promise you the strength training is contributing to that. So that's the dual benefit of it, and we can't ignore those benefits. And I think it's important that runners think about that. And I must add here, we're talking about resistance training. We're not talking about the other things like yoga and things that are good exercises, but for running purposes, we're talking about resistance training. So working your muscles against some kind of force. So that's body weight. It can be resistance bands, dumbbells, weights, but it is against some kind of force. So it really does. It's such a useful thing. And I think when people start doing it and realize the benefits, it helps a lot. Yeah, and I mean, I know you're a convert to strength training. I don't have to, I'm preaching to the choir, but it really, really is important work.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think, yeah, with strength training, we can't encourage it enough. I know it might not be everyone's cup of tea, as you mentioned, but the benefits will come and you will feel it later on. And
Yeah.
Tutu, what should the strength training routine look like through the week? How many sessions are we getting in, and do we need to spend 2 hours in the gym? Do we even have to go to the gym to do our strength training?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, you don't need to do as much as you think you do, and we're not training to be weightlifters and powerlifters. That's not our goal. Our goal is to make ourselves stronger runners and using strength training to facilitate that. So it's doing, and the main thing is obviously it's the key muscle groups that you're working. So the things that affect running are the glutes, the quads, the hamstrings, calf muscles, and your hips, hip flexors, and often when we have things like ITB, for example, is a very common injury amongst runners. That's often a deficiency somewhere in your glutes and the hip flexors, that region. Often a lot of knee injuries are around quads, where the quads are pulling on the knee. And we know when people do a lot of intensity work, that your lower leg, your calf muscles, and your Achilles area, that's what gets affected. So those are the things that you're focusing on. And you only really need to do so 2 to 3 strength sessions. I think for most people, 2 sessions is enough.
Yeah.
One focused on injury prevention and one focused on like sort of your more traditional resistance work. And time-wise, it's not a lot of time. So you can do 20, 25 minutes, 30, 40 minutes. You don't need to do 2 hours at a time. You don't need to go to the gym. So I've got a set of resistance bands and I've got a dumbbell set that is adjustable weights that goes up to, I think, 12 kilograms each. And that's all that I use. I've got an exercise mat, resistance bands, and dumbbells, and a kettlebell. So that's pretty much it. But you don't need all that stuff. If you've got resistance bands and a mat, and you can do body weight work, that is better than not doing anything at all. And I think it's really, really important to encourage people, because people think, oh, I've got to go to the gym, and you don't need to. And then in terms of the movements, like we said, the sort of the muscle groups, but essentially you're looking at things like you need to do some kind of hip hinge movement. So it's things like deadlifts, for example, and you can do those again with body weight, squats, which work your glutes and your quads and hamstrings, lunges, some kind of stepping movement, because running is a stepping movement. You need to do some kind of calf loading, so things like calf raises are quite important. Pushing things, like pushing movements and pulling movements. So things like rows for pulling movements, planks, push-ups, that kind of stuff for pushing movements. And those are the basic, of course, we can get more creative and do stuff with them, but the basic stuff that you need to do is 5 to 7 different movements, and you do a few sets of those, and that's enough. And if you do 2 30-minute sessions, it will go a long way to improving your running and help you to improve and be able to handle the work that you need to do for marathon training and any kind of training in general.
No, you're 100% correct. I think often the upper body gets left out when we get to running strength training, just because you think you don't really use your arms. But I mean, a lot of athletes will complain that they're finishing the race and they see the video or the photo of them crossing the line and they look just like hunched over. Like their upper body is actually exhausted because you've carried yourself for numerous hours. And yeah, the upper body is tired. So we also, of course, can't forget the core. But with that in Tutu, I think we've covered a nice strength training topic over here. So thank you for that. And I see you are itching to go and use your resistance bands and your kettlebell and dumbbells. So I'm going to let you do that in Tutu. But we will see you next week. We'll be on episode 6, speaking a little bit more about recovery, rest days, some nutrition, and then sleep. So with that in Tutu, I hope you have a great day. Thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you very much, Jamie, and good luck with everyone. And I hope you all have a very good training week coming up.